Welcome to the celebration of the first Indigenous People Day in Portland. While the federal government still holds a man who not only did not discover the Americas, but also killed and enslaved all the indigenous people on the island that he did land on. But we are all here today to celebrate on a day set aside for the founding of the Americas, to celebrate those who were first here, and despite the ongoing genocide of their people over centuries, the Wabanaki which is the name of the tribes in Maine, the land of the first dawn, continue on. This evening will be in several parts: some spoken words, a short video, and a discussion panel, in hopes of not only celebrating, but educating and sharing history that most of us grew up not knowing in our own whitewashed history classes. That is still being taught till this day. We are fortunate in Maine. There is an organization called Maine Wabanaki Reach that works to help teach allies the truth of our joint history, and also hold the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to gather testimonies from the taken, another sad part of our shared history, where the Native children were ripped from their homes and they took them to boarding schools where they cut off their hair and did not allow them to speak their own language or be with their siblings, with harsh punishments, abuse, and in some cases death. These testimonies are archived at Bowdoin College, open to the public. I also encourage you to view The Canary Effect. That is online for free and actually is being shown on CTN today 3 times. We have info on the table over here of how you can get involved with REACH and donate to them. Lastly, I want to talk about an event that happened this July and will happen again next July 13th through 16th, called Healing the Wounds of Turtle Isle, in which Indigenous elders from around the world were invited to the most beautiful spot in I'm going to have a problem here. Say it?
Pasadena.
Thank you. Pasadena, Maine, which is up near Indian Isle, called Nubizin. That the Wabanaki are trying to buy from a land trust to use as a healing center and promote sustainability for all people and future generations. There will be a fundraiser October 15th. You have this information, I put it on all of the seats, to help raise those funds. And folks can also, if you can't go and you can't donate online and want to leave a check, we can make sure that that gets to them too. We have other information on the table over here that you're welcome to take. So now we will start the program with Pious Ali, the city councilor who put the proclamation forth, reading it for us. Pious.
Thank you, Jackie. So my name is Pious Ali. I'm the city councilor in Portland. In March of this year, I participated in a workshop led by Ken at USM. And by the time I left that workshop, I made a decision that I will use the office that the people of Portland have given me to make sure that the narrative is changed, and that the voice that has been silenced for so many years will be heard. And luckily enough, when I discussed with my colleagues on the council, I had full support for that. So today was supposed to be the mayor reading this, because that's about how we do it. If the proclamation have to be read, the mayor should be the one reading it. He is not here, and Jackie reached out to me and said if I will be reading it instead of the mayor, and I said, yeah, I'll be honored. So resolution recognizing Indigenous Peoples Day on the second Monday in October. Whereas Indigenous Peoples Day, honoring the original people of many colonized lands, was first proposed in 1977 by a delegation of Native nations to the International Conference on Discrimination Against Indigenous Population in the Americas. And whereas the United States endorsed the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People on December 16, 2010, which recognizes that indigenous people have suffered from historic injustice as a result of, inter alia, their colonization and dispossession of their lands, territories, and resources. And whereas the City Council of the City of Portland recognizes that Portland was itself founded and is built upon lands first inhabited by the indigenous people of this region, known as the Wabanaki. And whereas the City of Portland recognizes that the indigenous people of the land that will later become or known as the Americas have occupied these lands since time immemorial. And whereas a growing number of cities and towns in the United States of America have recognized the second Monday of October as Indigenous Peoples Day, thereby creating an opportunity to learn about and celebrate indigenous heritage and resiliency. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the City Council of the City of Portland, the City Council of the City of Portland, Maine, hereby recognize Indigenous Peoples Day on the second Monday in October, and encourages businesses, organizations, and public institutions and civic organizations to also recognize Indigenous Peoples Day, in order that this city and its residents acknowledge and honor these members of the community, both past and present, without whom the creation of this country would not have been possible. Thank you.
Indigenous Peoples Day by Barbara Cates. Across the country, individuals, organizations, and governments are recognizing the second Monday in October as Indigenous Peoples Day. It is a change intended to honor Native Americans instead of honoring Christopher Columbus for all that he did and all he represents. Ceasing celebration of Christopher Columbus is an acknowledgement that Columbus led his men in heinous acts of murder and torture of thousands of indigenous children, women, and men. Columbus represents the human destructiveness of colonial invasions and domination, and the beginning of the genocide of indigenous people in this hemisphere. Now we ask ourselves, what does it mean to honor indigenous people? We answer this question within the context of a dominant culture that insists on maintaining its own narrative about indigenous people and refuses to acknowledge the overwhelming evidence that the narrative has been filled with lies, including the lies of honoring Native people through Indian mascots, favorite children's literature, movies, place names, and more. We have a lot to learn about how to honor indigenous people. When communities replace Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day, We see the cracks in the false narrative and an opening for the truth to shine in. We celebrate those who have been and are working to open those cracks for more education, healing, and change. Maine communities are beginning to focus on the work that needs to be done in their own neighborhoods, recognizing that dismantling white supremacy and racist structures is the responsibility of non-Native people, not an additional burden to be borne by Native people. People across this territory are taking it upon themselves to dismantle historical lies and myths that have shrouded the truth. Across Maine, people are seeking to honor Indigenous people by learning about the collective histories and current relationships of Native and non-Native peoples through workshops, presentations, sermons, readings, films, and conversations. Connecting deeply with the land and waters and the responsibility we have to protect and restore the health of the earth. Taking action for the land and waters. Taking action to stop the state from continuing to take away territory, health, and opportunity from Wabanaki people. Columbus Day was created to reinforce a limited narrative that our country was founded by brave explorers and settlers. That narrative told us that wars, slavery, and other forms of oppression were unfortunate byproducts of the overall success of this earlier age. In this narrative, genocide does not exist in America. When we gather to learn the full narrative, the full truth, we are involved in shaking the foundation of racism in this country. When we gather to deepen our commitment to health of the land and waters, we are creating a future for generations to come. When we take action, we honor Indigenous people. Together, we are writing our grandchildren's history, one that they will be proud of. By Barbara Cates, Maine Community Organizer, Maine Wabanaki Root. Thank you.
Our keynote speaker is a very special friend of mine, and she is from the Penobscot, and a lawyer and a teacher and a spiritual activist and human rights activist with from many awards, throughout, the United States and international. So I'm going to call up Sherri Mitchell now to give her speech. And big round of applause for her, please.
Just want to say Malalan to my elder, Richard Silaboy, for his work and for his words this morning, and for opening the space that allowed for us to be here together today. It's a very challenging day for me. I wouldn't have been here except that what we're talking about today is really important to me in a real heart-based way. And this community that's been created here in the state of Maine is really important to me in a heart-based way, and I wanted to honor the commitment that I made to all of you to be here today and to share a little bit about our basic worldview, connection to land, our responsibilities towards engaging in meaningful relationship with that land. And so I had some prepared comments, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of things that are going on, and then I'd be happy to entertain any questions that you have. So Woliwan, thank you for having me here. Woli Spazwell, good morning to you all. Ndaliwisi, wanahamukasit, najiupanawapskeg, Dilnabamo Kawasos, Nobanawapskeg, Nagakakugus, Notzabaik, and Nalita Hasiu and Diane. My name is Sherri Mitchell. I'm from the Penobscot Nation. My family is Bear Clan from the Penobscot Nation and Crow Clan from the Passamaquoddy Tribe at Sibayak. And I'm happy to be here with you today. So, I'm here today to talk to you about creating a framework for a way of life that is in harmony with the rest of creation. As always, my story begins with a basic worldview that frames the way of life that I live and walk on Mother Earth. Our discussion begins right here, on the land that we are all sitting and standing upon. For many, the land of their birth is seen as an extension of their bloodline, not just in a purely metaphorical sense, but through tangible connections to the flesh, bone, and blood of the ancestors that lived and died there. There's a Crow elder named Shees Crow who once said, "The soil you see beneath your feet is not ordinary soil. It is the dust of the blood, the flesh, and the bones of our ancestors. The land as it is my blood and my dead, and I would not give it up, not for anything." This land here holds the dust of the blood, the flesh, and the bones of my ancestors. And I'd like you all to just take a moment and take your hand, put it on the earth, and join me in a moment of silence to honor the presence of those ancestors here on this land. Thank you, Kachuliwan. So the relationships that exist between people and place are often memorialized through defining words that merge into story. As Indigenous peoples, our lives are comprised of these words and the stories that they tell. In order for us to find balance with the world around us, we must recognize that our stories are not the only stories that are being told. Every living thing has its own language and its own story. If we hope to live in balance and harmony in this world, we must learn to hear the many stories that are being told around us. Once we do, our worldview begins to change. We begin to see things with a new form of reverence. We recognize the value that exists in each aspect of creation. When we begin to comprehend the subtle language of creation, we start to see the underlying structure that supports all life on this planet. Our ears become attuned to new frequencies. Then we find that we're able to hear the voices of the trees, understand the buzzing of the bees, and we realize that it is the interwoven substance of these floating rhythms that holds us in delicate balance with all life. Then, perhaps for the first time in our lives, we're able to witness the perfectly orchestrated dance of creation and see the balance that exists within it. We recognize that when the trees breathe in carbon dioxide and release oxygen, our lungs automatically mirror that movement by breathing in the oxygen that is generously given and releasing carbon dioxide back to the trees. We see our connectivity and interdependence with one another, and we understand that our web of kinship extends far beyond our human family. My tribe has a number of creation stories, and each one of those stories tells us a different aspect of our being. One of those stories tells us that we were created when Glooskap, who is the man from nothing, shot an arrow into the ash tree and opened a doorway into this world. This story teaches us that we were made of the same fundamental elements that make up the natural world. In this story, we are born out of the ash tree. Thus, the ash tree is our kin and should be honored in the same way that we honor our human family. Today, as was mentioned earlier, our tribes still recognize our relationship with the ash tree by weaving our traditional baskets from its pulp. I encourage you to go to the Maine Indian Basket Maker's tent and to see those baskets when you leave here. When we weave those baskets, we are reminding ourselves that we are woven from those same foundational elements that make up all life on this planet. This worldview is ancient and it's held by peoples from across the globe in many different forms. It reminds us of our place in creation, keeping us grounded and balanced. And it also provides us with a new cultural reality, a new ethos, where the underlying spirit of our humanism is extended to everything animate and inanimate that exists in the universe. Over the last few centuries, we've developed a very humanistic view of the world. From this perspective, humans are viewed as the dominant beings, and the earth and all other living creatures are simply seen as resources to be exploited. We have developed countless laws and social contracts that support this narrow view of our place in the world. But these laws and social contracts are based in dominance ideologies that are grossly imbalanced with the rest of creation. All of the laws that have been made are based on some form of common agreement. And every agreement contains both rights and responsibilities. When we talk about rights from an Indigenous perspective, we recognize that they are inextricably tied to a corresponding set of responsibilities that require us to maintain a balanced relationship with the rest of creation. This is natural law, this is the Creator's law, and it's based on our earliest agreement. In our original treaty, our agreement with the Creator, that's when we began our relationship with this world. In our language, the word that is used for agreement is Lugudwagan, which literally translated means entering into kinship with another. It is understood that the forming of an agreement is the forming of a relationship. When we enter into those relationships, we're agreeing to treat the other with the same degree of care and respect that we treat our kin. We know that if we want to claim the rights provided under that agreement, we must honor the responsibilities as well. In our first agreement, we were given the right to inhabit this earth and to live off the sustenance provided by the land. The responsibility that we took on to balance that right was to live in harmony with the natural world and all living beings. The way that we have honored that agreement is by living in respectful balance with our land and waterways for thousands of years. The evidence of our continued adherence to that agreement can be found in the core principles that have been woven into the practices of our modern-day tribal governance. It can be seen in the conscious steps that we've taken to honor and protect the lands and waters that we inhabit. It can be seen in the harvesting limits that are found in our forestry programs, in fish and game laws that take careful measure to ensure the sustainability of our traditional food sources, and in decades-long restoration projects that have restored and revitalized the waters of our sacred waterway, the Penobscot River, and in the creation of land and quality standards that protect and sustain the health of our lands and waters for all current and future generations. Taking active responsibility for our obligations under this original agreement provides a natural balance and a solid footing for the rights that we claim. Without this balance, we would destroy the very ground that these rights are built upon. If we want evidence of this truth, we don't have to look very far. We only have to look at the unchecked destruction of the natural world that is being caused by capitalist greed, the failure of industry to take responsibility for the destruction of our planet, and our complacency and complicity. They're quickly taking away our right to live our lives on this planet. Of course, when I talk about natural laws, I'm talking about the laws of creation, which are not generally aligned with the laws of man. As human beings, we have fallen out of step with the rest of creation. We have lost our way and overinflated our sense of value. In doing so, we have walked away from the fundamental law that keeps this world in balance. As a result, the entire creation has become imbalanced. Our relationships with all other living beings and our relationships with one another. Man's attempt to regain this balance has resulted in a series of legal obligations excuse me, that inform us how we are to treat one another. We've become so lost that we have to have laws that tell us how to be human and how to engage in human relationships. Though these laws are vital to securing our freedoms and liberties, they fail to take into consideration the need to balance the place of human beings within the larger context of creation. In order for us to achieve true balance, we must work to extend those rights to all living beings and to Mother Earth herself. If we hope to live in a society where rights are valued, then we have to be willing to adopt an ethical stance toward our inherent responsibilities as human beings. First, we must recognize that an exclusive and empty insistence on rights creates a vacuum of need that can never be filled. Demanding rights without taking responsibility creates a warped sense of entitlement that often leads to violence, lawlessness, and chaos. Second, we have to acknowledge that the rules of law pertaining to our rights are only as strong as the men and women who are willing to act with honor and justness to secure those rights for all, not just for their group, not just for their species. When my tribe decided that the Penobscot River needed to be cleaned of the decades of toxic waste created by industry, they didn't simply stand up on a soapbox and claim a right to clean water. Instead, they worked in concert with others and took on the responsibility of cleaning those waters for the benefit of all current users and for the enjoyment of all future users. We recognize that if we wanted to claim the right to clean water for our own people, then we had to take responsibility for ensuring clean water for everyone. When we looked at our right to subsistence living, we recognized that this also came with a set of unique responsibilities. In order to properly claim those rights, we had to work to protect the rights of Mother Earth to exist with all of her ecological systems and biodiversity intact, in order to ensure that the wildlife in our territories could live and thrive upon those lands just as we hope to. In doing so, we acknowledge that our rights were interconnected, interdependent, tied to the rights of all other living beings that made their home there. The same principle translates into our individual lives and the work that we are doing collectively to protect both human and earth-based rights. It helps us to remember that our demand for rights must be balanced with a set of clear responsibilities. We must be willing to do more than make a demand. We must be willing to actively work to create a world where that demand can be met. We cannot claim a right to clean water without taking responsibility for actively protecting the water from contamination and overuse. We cannot claim a right to clean air without taking responsibility for the creation of healthy and sustainable energy sources and industrial practices. We cannot claim a right to a more equitable economy without taking responsibility for how and where we spend our money. And we cannot claim a right to ethical leadership without taking responsibility for voting in candidates that we believe in rather than those that we believe can win. We cannot claim a right to life without first taking responsibility for the lives that have already been created. And we cannot claim a right to peace without taking responsibility for cultivating peace within ourselves and in our relationships with others, even those that we oppose. When our rights are not balanced with a solid sense of responsibility, we lead toward dependency and begin blaming others for the problems that we face. And we begin demanding that others step in and solve those problems. We point fingers, accuse, and condemn all those who are refusing to do what we ourselves have failed to do individually and collectively. When our demands aren't met, we become increasingly angry and lash out in response to that anger. This is where we depart decisively from our most basic moral compass when we fail to adhere to what's known as the golden rule, doing unto others as we would have them do unto us. When we demand something for ourselves that we are not willing to ensure for others, our demand loses all of its power. When we fail to take responsibility for the condition of our lives and the lives of those around us, we relinquish the power to chart our own course and the course of humanity. We also surrender our ability to change the world. However, when we take even small steps to accept responsibility, the responsibility that's needed to balance our own demands, we immediately begin to see change in the world around us. Every single person that's here at the Common Ground Fair has taken at least one step. And so if you look around, you can see all of the people who are complicit with you in changing the world that we live in. If we truly hope to create change, we must stop forgetting that we have the power to make change happen. Instead, we must remember that we are many, that we have the power to completely divest our lives and financial resources from harmful practices that threaten all life on this planet. That we have the power to disengage from fear-mongering, sensationalism, othering, and other discordant tactics that are used to divide us. We must remember to stand up for one another and to communicate with one another in the spirit of unity, to see one another as kin. We must remember that we have the collective power to direct our economic and political systems and move them away from the practices of domination and destruction and back towards a more humane and restorative path. We must remember that we are all co-creators of the reality that we inhabit, and that we have the freedom to choose a new path, one that protects the rights of the entire ecosystem to live in balance. When we balance our demand for rights with an acceptance of our responsibility toward one another and all other living beings, we take back our power. We can begin the process of charting a new pathway forward by balancing the rights that we claim with a corresponding action that ensures those rights for all. Then, piece by piece, we will build a foundation for a rights-based society that is balanced, just, and harmonious. Maybe it won't be fast, maybe it won't be easy. I can assure you it probably won't be easy, but it won't happen at all if we don't make it happen together. And so there are countless people, thank you. The good news is that there are countless people around the world who are doing just that. There are people who are recognizing that projection becomes perception, and that, we project both the light and the darkness onto the screen of our reality. So our minds are the projector, our thoughts are the film, and the screen is the world that you see around you. And so when we project, whether we project the light or the darkness, we're giving away our power. Projecting the darkness is what happened on this land when there was a genocide of Indigenous peoples. Projecting the darkness is what happens when you see something like the genocide in Nazi Germany. Projecting the darkness is saying that Black Lives Matter is a terrorist group. Projecting the darkness is saying that people in other parts of the world, such as the Middle East, are terrorists for protecting their homes, way of life, and families. That's a projection of darkness, and that's a separation of our power. We're taking the power from within us, we're projecting it out, and casting blame on someone else. They're responsible for the state of the world, it's not us. We also project our light when we expect others to come in and solve our problems for us. Our savior complex, our dependency on leadership and other people to come in and to solve our problems is also a separation of power. And so when we project our light, we also disconnect ourselves from the power and authority we have to dictate the type of world that we wish to inhabit. And so people are waking up all over the world. They're disengaging from the systems and the structures that have been leading to our destruction. They're recognizing that it is an act of conquest to supplant one candidate with another within a broken system and expect that that candidate is going to be able to change anything. It's like putting somebody in a car that has no steering and no brakes and putting the car into motion. The car's going to go for a little while, then eventually it's going to crash. They pull the car out of the ditch, they clean it all off, they take out the current driver, they put someone else in, they put the car in motion again, and it inevitably goes off the road. This is our current political system. This is the way that our government and societies have been structured. So we need to break away from that illusion, break away from that projection that putting somebody else in the driver's seat of that car is going to change the outcome. It's always going to derail because it was never made to drive straight. And so when we start thinking about where we invest our power, where we invest our energy, where we invest our money and our hearts and our passions, we have to think about what does the world we hope to create actually look like? What does it look like? And then start being and doing that. We have to take responsibility for stepping outside of the system that's being kept alive on life support artificially. We have to take our energy away from that false support system and start moving it into a new system, a new way of being, a new normal. Because what's become normal is completely unnatural for us. It's unnatural for us to be separated from the source of our survival. It's unnatural for us to be separated from one another in a heart-based way. It's unnatural for us to not live in community. Just because that's become normal doesn't mean that that's natural. We need to reconnect to our natural state of being, which is in harmony and kinship with one another, in harmony and kinship with the rest of the world. And then we need to create together, based on that grounded place, that grounded sense of knowing, a new normal that we can all walk into together. And so that's the impetus for the work that I do. That's, I know, the impetus for the work that a lot of you do. The only thing that we need to do right now, I think the primary thing that we need to do right now is to decolonize our minds and let go of the illusion that someone else is going to come along and solve our problems for us. We have to, thank you. I heard I did a talk with Rob Shutterly, who did the Americans Who Tell the Truth portrait series the other night, and Rob was talking about this concept of original sin. And in my mind, original sin is our belief in the illusion of separation. That's the place where we really decisively departed from our own sense of power and our own source of survival, our own inherent truth that we hold as living beings that are part of one large living creation. And so being able to walk away from that illusion, to wake up and to realize what we're walking towards. The time that we're in right now, our people call the dance of the cannibal giant. Giwalk is the cannibal giant who lives deep in the forest. And he only awakens to a specific cry from the Earth Mother. He wakes up when people are consuming faster than she can produce and harming her faster than she can heal. And what Giwalk's role is to dance civilization into this blind fury of activity until they eventually dance themselves off the edge. They dance themselves to destruction so that the Earth Mother has time to restore and renew herself. We're living in the time of the fourth dance of the cannibal giant. We've been told that we've been here 4 times before, and we weren't able to get it together. And so every time we come closer and closer, and we unify more and more. But right now, we're also living in a time of prophecy. You have the prophecy of the Rainbow Warriors, you have the 8th Fire prophecy, you have the Crazy Horse prophecy, the Eastern Door prophecy. You have all of these prophecies rising up and coming together. Is our responsibility toward those teachings to just watch them come and go? Or is our responsibility to actively engage in the time that we are living in order to create an outcome that is aligned with our true heart? I believe that that is our true purpose. So I don't know how long I've been talking, but I want to leave time for us to have some questions, but there are a couple of other things I want to talk to you about. We have a sacred property in Passadumkeag, Maine, in Penobscot territory. We had a very large gathering called Healing the Wounds of Turtle Island there over the summer, where we had representatives from every continent except Antarctica. We couldn't get any scientists or penguins to come, so, but every other continent was represented, and the people there came together with the intent of healing the common wound that we all carry, healing this shared history of violence that we've all participated in, whether we have been the victims of violence, the perpetrators of violence, the witness to violence, recognizing that we all carry a spiritual wound from that, and coming together with the intent of healing that in a unified way, looking at each other, sitting with each other, eye to eye, heart to heart, breath to breath, and recognizing that we're all wounded, and that we can't heal unless we take responsibility for one another's healings. The earth can't heal unless we're healed. We can't heal unless the earth is healed. There's this dance of interconnectivity that we're all a part of. And so we had this gathering at this place called Nabizin, which is this really beautiful sacred space where our ancestors used to gather. And that property went out of the hands of tribal people for a long, long time. And just recently, tribal people have had the opportunity to take that land back, and what was chosen to do with that property was to turn it into a healing center. And so it's a cultural healing center where people come together to engage in activities that facilitate healing. So it was a perfect place for us to hold the Healing Turtle Island gathering, because within its essence, it holds the energy of that healing. And so in order to be able to maintain that property, the tribal members who stepped forward to save it made an agreement with a land trust to make, in 1 year's time, a very large balloon payment. That payment is due 1 month from tomorrow, I believe. And so I have had brochures and flyers handed out to give you all information on Nabizin, so that you can all join us in supporting that really important sacred place, and to keep it in the hands of tribal people. Thank you. And so why should you care about Indigenous land rights? Why should you care about these lands being held in the hands of Indigenous peoples? Because Indigenous lands that remain in the hands of traditional Indigenous peoples are some of the only remaining untouched lands on the planet. Indigenous peoples have rights under both domestic and international law that are unique. This is why there's a concerted effort going on around the country and around the world to dismantle Indigenous rights, because they do provide a buffer that is not ordinarily there. In our water case with the state of Maine, just to connect the dots. You can connect the dots. I'm not going to connect them for you. I'm going to give you a series of events that occurred, and you can decide what happened. So in July of 2012, Canada passed a resolution that allowed for a reversal of what's called Line 9, Enbridge Line 9, which was flowing to the west. They did the reversal to allow that pipeline to flow to the east so that they could bring dirty tar sands from the west, from the Alberta tar sands to the east. Shortly after that meeting, individuals from our government, including Governor Paul LePage, representatives from the DEP and others, went to Canada and met with Canadian officials and ExxonMobil. In August, less than a month after Enbridge Line 9 was reversed, the Maine Attorney General's office issued a memorandum saying that the Penobscot Nation did not have territorial rights to their waterways. Yeah, boo. So those rights have been recognized in the 2010 Maine Supreme Court case called Maine v. Johnson, which recognizes the Southern Territorial Waters of the tribe. They're recognized in countless treaties. They're recognized in the 2010 Bureau of Census maps as reservation waters. But all of a sudden in 2012, all of the tribe's rights just unilaterally disappeared because the route that those were going to take, the transmission of the dirty tar sands, and also of the hydrofracked gas that was being cultivated in New Brunswick, was from Coburn Gore to Calais, Maine, to go to shipping ports. So what else do you know of that was scheduled to go from Coburn Gore to Calais, Maine? The big industrial corridor called the East-West Corridor. And so when you start putting all the dots together, and when you've done some Indigenous rights work outside of the state of Maine and outside of the United States, you start to recognize a pattern. There's always a preemptive strike against Indigenous rights. Prior to that, the Penobscot River is the lifeblood of the entire ecosystem of the center of the state of Maine. It's the largest body of water in the state of Maine. And all of the cities and towns from Coburn Gore to Calais would be impacted, because it's not a matter of if a tar sands pipeline will leak, but when. And it's in all of our interests to ensure that those people who have taken responsibility for being good stewards of the land, which the Penobscot Nation has proven to be, they're the ones that took responsibility for cleaning up those waterways, are allowed to maintain their relationship with those waterways so that those waterways are protected into the future. And so that work is critically important, and it not only impacts us, it impacts the entire ecosystem connected to the Penobscot River. It impacts every single city and town in the state of Maine. This is known as vacation land. That will quickly go away if we allow our environment and our vital ecosystems to be destroyed by industry. So that's why it's important for you all, from a legal standpoint, to protect Indigenous rights. From a human and spiritual standpoint, it's important because you recognize that you are not disconnected from it, you are not disconnected from us, that we're all in this together. The destruction of any one of us leads to the destruction of all of us. And if we don't stand up and make those assertions, what we call samognos, it's a warrior philosophy of holding back the tide of harm to the degree that prevents it without inflicting harm on the other. We're saying we're not going to allow you to harm our lives or the lives of our children, but we honor your life and we're not going to harm your life. And so we need to walk that practice of samognos, not just in theory, but actually feet on the ground, prayers in movement, as a way of life, what we call Skajinawe Bamalsawagan, which is living an Indigenous way of life close to the earth. So I would like for all of you to join us and bring all of your friends. It's critically important that we achieve a membership of, at the very least, 500 people. Not membership, participation. Participation of at least 500 people. There's way more than 500 people here. If everybody that's here grabs one or two friends just sitting on the lawn and brings them to this gathering, we're going to be in good shape. And it's going to be fantastic fun. On October 15th, we are having a harvest festival at Nabizin to celebrate community, to celebrate unity, to celebrate the spirit of healing, and to celebrate the sacred lands and waters that we all share together. So mark your calendars, October 15th, Nabizin. There's flyers and brochures out there. Bring lots of friends. We're going to have the day start out at noon with drumming and traditional dancing. We're going to have food vendors there. We're going to have native artisans booths there. We're going to have a silent auction. If any of you amazing artists presenting at the Common Ground Fair would like to donate an item for our silent auction, we would love it. We would be incredibly grateful. There's going to be children's games and activities, and then we're going to have 3 other bands throughout the day, and we're going to end the day with a huge dance party featuring soul benders. So it's going to be fun. It's a really important cause. We need all of you to show up with us and join us in that celebratory event that is really a coming together of community, demonstrating what community means, putting our feet and our money and our mouths where we claim that we want to stand, which is on solid ground together in unity in a space of healing. So please come. Nabizin is in Passadumkeag. I have flyers and brochures up here. Nabizin is N-I-B-E-Z-U-N. What Nabizin means in our language is healing. So you can find it. There's going to be flyers and brochures in the Maine Indian Basket Makers tent as well. And so before I end today, I want to ask you all if you would do something for me and with me. I would like for you all to stand up and to hold hands with the people that are next to you.
Ice cream.
Everybody connect with somebody. If somebody doesn't want to hold your hand, put your finger on their arm, just like an annoying little brother or sister would do. And so I want to share with you something that's very personal for me. And the reason why I almost wasn't here today. This year has been a very difficult year for our family. In January, one of my cousins went missing and his body was found in the Penobscot River. 1 week after his body was found, my beloved nephew, who was like a son to me, whose mother has been like a sister and a second mother and aunt to me, lost her son to suicide. In Native communities, the suicide rate is 4 times higher than the national average because of the unrelenting oppression that our communities have experienced. I grew up in a community where there were houses on 3 sides of my house. In every single one of those houses, the majority of the children that I grew up with died by either suicide or drug overdose. It's an epidemic in our community that is caused by people turning a blind eye to our suffering. It's caused by people not standing with us in times of struggle. It's caused by our young people not seeing a future for themselves because of the constant oppression, the constant racism, the constant degradation of our images and our names that are being bandied about. If we want to save our young people, if we want to save our future, if we want to be able to walk forward together, then we need to continue to exist into the future. And this morning at 2 a.m., one of my other nephews took his life. And I'd like to ask you all to not only pray for him and for his father and his little girl, but to also acknowledge the preciousness of every single life. Acknowledge the separation that makes us believe that any one of us is traveling alone. Don't blow off as, I don't have time, I'm too busy, you're annoying, go get some help for your issues. Don't treat other people with that kind of dismissiveness. Acknowledge the preciousness of every single life. So please send prayers for the spirits of those lost young men. That's our future that we're losing. And they were beautiful people, every one of them. And I would like to ask you to turn to the people that you're holding hands with and look them in the eye and tell them, you are precious, you're important, you matter, I love you, and then give them a hug, and we'll end our time together like that. So, Kachiwali one.
This quilt represents Indian Island. In this case, the turtle refers to Indian Island, located across from Old Town, Maine. Turtle Island describes the earth in general. The 2 side panels depict the 2 paper mills and dioxins that emitted into the river. The left panel shows the downstream paper mill, and right panel portrays the upstream one. The decorative motif on the borders is the oldest known for the Wabanaki people and could be thousands of years old. This is here. And Miku is here today too, she's right back there. The text on the quilt is an excerpt from the Declaration of Indian Rights, 1724 treaty between the delegates of the Eastern Indians and Massachusetts Governor William Dummer. Maine did not exist at this time. That said, Indians shall peaceably enjoy all their lands and properties which have not been conveyed and sold or possessed by the English, and no ways molested or disturbed in their planting, improvement, and further they'll be allowed from the free liberty and privilege of hunting, fishing, and fowling. So that really goes along and explains a little bit about this quilt. So if you'd like to come up and look at it closely, later on, please feel free. And thank you for this moment to be able to explain the quilt.
Hi, my name is Margie Dowser. I live in Portland, and I grew up in upstate New York in Onondaga County. I learned about state history and the importance of the Iroquois Confederacy in the founding of the United States and how it set an example and was used as an example by other founders of the U.S. in terms of states and forming a country. I've been involved in various Native issues in Boston, on Cape Cod, in Mashpee, Wampanoag territory, and in the time that I've lived in Maine, which has been about 12 years. And I'm also part of the Maine Wabanaki Reach groups, learning more about Wabanaki history here in Maine and the 4 Maine tribes that are still remaining, and trying to learn and save the water in the river too.
Hi, my name is Miku Paul, and I grew up in Old Town. My family is originally from Lower Canada. I'm French and Maliseet, and my family came from Kingsclear, New Brunswick, First Nations. My mom was born in Holton, where there's a band of Maliseets, and I was born actually on an old Air Force base in Bangor. My granddad married a Penobscot woman and kind of settled there. We moved down. I've lived in Portland a long time, but I grew up on the Penobscot River. And although I am not Penobscot, I really do have a very strong ancestral connection to that waterway. My granddad was a traditional elder. He made his living after serving in World War II by being a guide, a hunter, and spent a lot of time fishing on the river, and a trapper. And I, as my mother's last child, had the great opportunity and blessing to be raised by my grandfather and my mother. At least I think in this region of the country that is something that had been more rare. Fewer and fewer people are having that chance for a traditional Indigenous education along with a formal education. Part of the reason is obviously the pressures, from modern society and pressures of assimilation in public school systems, but also because we are losing our elders. And so there are many groups and communities really focused on the resurgence of language and culture for our Indigenous groups here in Maine and further out. And it's very, very important work. So I have a degree from the UMaine system in human development and communication, but then I went back to grad school and became a writer. And one of the things I want to do tonight for you is to share with you a poem that is about Columbus Day from my first book, 20th Century Powwow Playland, and to let you know that I printed broadsides of this, and they're for you to take with you. I encourage you to take one They're on the table with the other materials. I went to a little public school in Old Town called Jefferson Street School, very old building, but this is the experience that I had. Jefferson Street School. I came here to learn. Kindergarten captive, daily the unseen line redrawn, chalked skin, a toe dragged in red dust. Repeat after me, Mrs. Lavoie said, her talcum voice a soft drift in my ears. Invader's language spilled from my lips. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. I am the constant witness, death, destruction, every chapter an arrival. Spanish, French, English, my own tribe nameless, discarded, the page blank. Bruised, I acknowledge those commemorative gifts, 2 books, black on Sunday, blue on Monday. Worn covers proclaimed reverent use, recitation, praise him from whom all blessings flow. Centuries come and gone, I memorize conquest, recount murderous exploits, tales of that one you call explorer. Columbus, thief of human beings, collector of nations whose name will never be forgotten. Immortal now in stone and story, a myth summoned year after year. The calendar an invocation. No longer a child, I greet this false idol. Hand pressed to bronze flesh, fingers trace polished granite, carved words, language that was never my own, yet all I've ever known. I do this in remembrance. Meus animus in incendia. This soul's measure lost in a chronology of symbols, 5 times 100 beaver moons. All those pieces of earth claimed, flag waving under threat of war and more war. Lesson number 1. My body, the geography. Altered terrain, illumined in the brilliant October moon, fading in the morning sun that rises on Columbus Day. Lesson number 2. Memory resides not in my head, but in my veins. More than the mind can describe, a silken web of souls, a drum pulse, a river of blood flooding the continent. Must there always be the wraith called suffering, the wolf called war? This river of blood may one day nourish the birth of a new story, a history of peace, the soul of a people. There.
You done?
You're up.
I'm up. Susie Louis Hamilton. My father grew up on the reservation up on Indian Island. I still have family up there. I go up as often as I can. I did not grow up on the res. I like to, because a lot of people will come up to me and say, well, you don't look like an Indian. And I say, well, I'm a product of 500 years of colonization. And they just sort of stare at me and go, oh, you know? But it makes them think a little bit, I think, afterwards. That's why I say that, you know? I'm not going to deny my heritage, deny my father to make other people feel comfortable. My father did that. He left the reservation and he told people he was Italian so that he wouldn't have as much discrimination and racism, you know, than identifying himself as Native. My great-grandmother was Elizabeth Sokolexis. When she had my grandfather, they had to change the names. We had to have an Anglo name. So we took on, so I don't know, out of the clear blue sky or something, that's what people would do, just pick a name out, and I'm Hamilton. So that's how I'm a Hamilton now. But I do have my father's middle name, Lewey, which is a prominent name up in Indian country. I worked, I was in media, I was in restaurant business. I've been involved with USM for many years. I worked there for 11 years doing the Native American waiver program and multicultural student affairs. I am not there anymore, but I continue as much work as I can with Native people. It's just a part of me. It's who I am, and I'm not going to deny that aspect of it. So I think it's wonderful, and I have to thank Jackie so much for starting this program here today. So I thank you, Jackie, back there. Thank you, Jackie. Much love. This woman's amazing. This woman's amazing. I'm so happy I got to meet her. So I will sum it up and pass it on to you, and you're next.
On the spot. Good evening. My name is Jeffrey Hotchkiss, and my family goes way back to the founding of the state of Connecticut. They were the early settlers, mostly from England. Hotchkiss is a prominent name in Connecticut. It's all over the place. And I haven't got a chance yet to learn the history of how they got to be so wealthy and powerful in the land of the Pequot and other tribes. What did motivate me to learn more about the true history of this country was the discovery of other encounters between the Hotchkiss name and Native peoples. And I won't go into details on that necessarily, but there were some pretty infamous events. So that was a shock to discover that, and then asking myself, why didn't I know this when I was going through grade school and learning that Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So the past 10, 15 years has been a journey of unlearning history and relearning history. And in the process, discovering a really beautiful work going on in the state of Maine, the Maine Wabanaki State Child Welfare Truth and Reconciliation Commission, for which as soon as I found an opportunity to volunteer, I raised my hand. And in the process, I've learned all kinds of history about the Wabanaki, the state relationships. I can put the controversy of the Penobscot River in context, that taking and understand the historical patterns and motivation. So I'm one who really wants to know the story and how things fit together, and this has been helpful. And that's why I was so, and I went to City Hall and testified in favor of Indigenous Peoples Day, and that's why I was so bemused and startled to find myself this afternoon feeling somehow at sea. I had lost my anchor of my childhood inculcation. Columbus is no longer the European hero, and it's official. And it just struck me that, oh, well, now I have some more inner work to do, and it'll be good work. So thank you.
So we'll open it up for questions. Anybody has anything they'd like to ask of the panel?
I have a question for you all. Do any of you have any notion of how many cities and states in the U.S. have passed a resolution on Indigenous Peoples' Day? Would you share it with us?
Well, I know that Seattle has, Los Angeles, not too long ago, did, and there's a county in Texas, of all places.
That's correct,
I know. And I think Minneapolis, St. Paul. And there are a couple of states, but they are escaping me right now.
There are 4, and Vermont is one of them. What's interesting, if you research this, is that there are, I believe, between 50 and 60 cities that have passed resolutions on Indigenous Peoples' Day, and 4 states, Vermont being one. But of those cities, more than 75% of them are west, and there's some Midwest. Not a whole lot going on in New England. And I think that's very telling. If we go back to school and our history lessons, you know, we know that, as I mentioned in the poem, that we've had many hundreds of years in assimilation and oppression and so forth. So I think that the environment that we're in definitely has an impact on the movement, but it is growing, the movement toward an Indigenous Peoples' Day.
Well, I think as more education that's coming to the forefront, that Columbus did not discover America. He never stepped one foot in this country. He landed in the Caribbean. And what's very important for you to understand this is watching the Canary Effect. If you don't catch it on this station, that's going to air it, I think, 3 times through this month, it's on YouTube. You can watch it on YouTube. There's a film called The Canary Effect, and then there's a documentary with a documentary. Okay? It's very powerful. You may have to take a break. I know Native people who have watched it, who it took them 3 or 4 times before they could get through the whole thing, you know? And, but it's very interesting because it will also tell you about genocide and explain what genocide is. And there are documents and everything that show, and written right from Captain's log, you know, about what Columbus did to the people when he met. He came back with 1,500 soldiers, landed in the Caribbean and just annihilated everyone. Also, I have a little. In the name of God. So it was funny. I work at a local restaurant, and a guy called me over last week, and he said, "So what's this restaurant going to do for Columbus Day?" And I said, "Well, probably nothing, you know. Well, I want to know if you're going to be celebrating Indigenous Peoples or not." And he says, "Well, what do you think about it?" And I said, "Well, you're probably not going to like this, but I am a tribal member of the Penobscot Nation." And that sort of baffled him a little bit. And I said, "I'm all for Indigenous Peoples' Day." And so, of course, he got into the Columbus thing. And there were 2 people sitting over in the corner, and they clapped their hands after I said a little bit something. And he was mad. And they said they were school teachers, and they hadn't taught that in class. And they were saying that they were little radicals at that time. He got up and started yelling at them. "Why did you teach me? Why did you teach me that? Why did you teach me that?" And he kept saying that over and over. And that's all he he wanted to say, because then I think he realized he was sort of outnumbered at that time. And he had had a few cocktails, so he was a little... And so I went over, after he left, I went over and talked to those people. And they said, we've done all kinds of research on Columbus. And he was an Italian. He grew up in Spain, in a very small county in Spain, much like Quebec in Canada, and they wanted to, the same thing that Canada did, want to withdrew from Canada and be their own state. Well, this town, I guess, has been doing that. They have their own culture, they have their own language, you know? So Columbus wasn't even Italian, and he had just gotten out of jail just before he, for corruption, just before he set sail. And Columbus didn't set sail with the Italians. He went to Spain.
Right.
You know, they're the ones that supplied his trip here, you know, to where he supposedly discovered America. That's why we're, you know, and he thought he landed in India. That's why we're known as Indians, because he thought he was in India. Great navigator, huh? So, you know, when we were at that meeting, at the council meeting, you know, people from the Italian heritage, you know, people were there defending him. And it was like, wow, people, you know, there are so many good Italians out there that you could really highlight for their gifts and for their work. You know, not that man, but they want to hold tight on that. And what my point is too, it's very hard to change your thought when you grow up knowing something, and that's the way it always was. It's very hard to change that, but it can be done. And I hope that educators in this state, you know, will teach Wabanaki history. There's all kinds of information about it through the tribes. They've been working on this for a long time because it is a law in the state of Maine, K through 12. They are supposed to teach Wabanaki history, and it's really not being done. Yes.
Could I pick up on a
Yes.
couple of things you said?
Yes.
For one thing, the law in Maine about teaching Native history it's an unfunded mandate. So it was passed a number of years ago and introduced into the legislature
Right.
by Donna Loring, the
Right.
Penobscot representative. So it passed, but how it's carried out really varies from teacher
Right.
to teacher and from school to school. The other thing I wanted to pick up on was what I've heard from, I'm not Italian, my background is Irish and Scottish, but from what I've heard from Italians that are very invested in the day is for them that's a day of pride about being Italian. And I agree, there are a million other Italians you could choose, you know, besides Christopher Columbus, whose savagery was just
Really?
brutal. I mean, they cut off people's hands, they fed native people to dogs. I mean, if the Tainos wouldn't, you know, get gold for them or, you know, they would cut their hands off. I mean, it's just the savagery is,
Yeah.
you know, and the slavery and all of that. It's just horrible. And one of the main people who reported on that was a man from Portugal who started out as an explorer, and I think his name was Bartolomé de Casas. And he wrote about this, and that's partly why we know, because otherwise we just would have this myth, you know. When you read some of this man's writings, he also became an activist against trying to reverse the slavery and the torture and subjugation of Native peoples. But the Italian part, I read somewhere that the day was officially declared Columbus Day. I think it was back in the 30s or 40s.
1933.
And it was one of the presidents, one of the Roosevelts. And this was at a time when immigration of Italians was high and the discrimination they were suffering was high, especially because they were Catholic. And so it kind of came out of that, and I can see how for Italian Catholic people, you know, it was something to latch on to, that, you know, it took all these years after 1492, but I guess I would pose to those people who really want to cling to that, you can be proud of being Italian, but you don't have to latch on to someone that really, I mean, you really need to face what he did, what we know of what he did. And there was another point I was going to make, but I forgot.
Well, one of the things I'd like to, and perhaps I can ask you this, no offense, but since you're sort of
Yeah.
outside the Indigenous experience in a
Yes.
sense, is, we talk about political correctness. And I've been doing a lot of thinking about that because it seems that it has become a tool. It's a term that we bandy around so much, and of course, there's always going to be some backlash toward what we're trying to do here. It's not enough to have a Native American Day. Canada has a National Indigenous Peoples Day, great. But what we're looking at is that it's not just that we want to recognize Indigenous peoples of the continent, but there is a problem here that we're trying to fix, which is the glorification of a murderous person who greatly contributed to the suffering of the population that was here. So my question to you is, how do you encounter, I imagine you do, and how do you respond to someone when you take a position in support of Indigenous peoples and in recognition of their history of suffering, when they say, oh, you're just being politically correct, how do you respond to that? Because I just think it's a tool, it seems to me, that's used to silence people.
Well, it depends on the mood I'm in and how much sleep I've had. But often I'll start by saying there's no such thing as political correctness. It was made up by Newt Gingrich in the 1980s to demonize liberals. And then the fur flies from there and we lose the original thread of thought. I think it's, in any argument, using that word is a way to sideline or hijack the argument or debate or discussion with a label and get away from the actual history of what happened. So what I do when I'm at my best is to try to reply with focused details of history and do my best to learn the history and bring it out in those conversations. And depending on who it is on the other side of the table, I can get farther or it stops with the next interruption. But at least it's my job and my role, because as a older white male in a white supremacist society, I'm going to hear that much more. Men my age and younger are going to assume that we have common ideas that we don't have, especially when they see me in my bus driving uniform. So it gives me that opportunity to listen and ask people when they come out with these things, oh, why do you say that? Tell me more. What are the assumptions behind it? And then inevitably there's a point in the conversation where I'll say, well, actually, what actually happened was, but it's an ongoing, as we saw with this gentleman earlier this evening who was annoyed with what I was reading and left, saying that we were anti-white. Right? That was not the, so it's not up to anybody in a oppressed minority to have to deal with that. That's my job. Right? And so I did. I walked out to make sure that he had gone down the street.
That's why allies are so important, allies for people of color, allies for Native people. And REACH, the Wabanaki REACH, they have a program that trains people to start understanding, and so that way they can talk to another person and start to explain the history and white privilege. And I mean, I have white privilege because I'm obviously white, but I'm also Native. And, so it's that biracial aspect that, you have to live in two different worlds. When I go up to the reservation, it's different. I live down here, it's different. I go into a discussion or a meeting and people look at me as white until we start talking about multicultural issues or diversity or race or white privilege, then they look at me differently. But it's that you've experienced the same thing. It's living in two worlds that you do have to adjust to. But to pick up on the ally training, is there information over here?
Yes, so we have, Panthea was kind enough to bring the newsletter that's over on the table there. There are also little cards for donation, and in the newsletter, there's a way to get yourself to get involved, and so that's set up over there. And I just wanted to say that as a 67-year-old person, I am just completely appalled that I have lived my life in lies, whitewashed history, and I can totally understand, and that's why reach is such an important thing, because when you start reach, you don't just go in, it's a really deep process, and Jeffrey can attest. Jeffrey and I were in the first group in Portland to do reach, and we spent over a year just working on our own white privilege, and we're still working on it. So there's so much learning that has to be given, and if you don't, it's one thing to tell a person about Christopher Columbus and the horrible things that he did, but if that person hasn't even worked with his own white privilege, there's a wall right there, and it's not going to come through. It's going to be just what that man said, you're against white people, because they have been, their whole lives, especially older people, their whole lives they've been taught these lies. And the other part that came to me through doing this work and going up to some of the hearings and listening to these amazing, amazing people speak the history truth that these ears were never allowed to hear, just how much I lost my life that I could have been involved with these amazing people who have lived through such amazing, and are still living. As you heard Sherri, you heard that whole speech that Sherri gave. She didn't tremble, she didn't, and it flowed from her. At parts she was reading the paper, but a lot of it was she was just talking. Yet she was living with that horrible thing that had just happened that morning to her. So this is, to me, my most upsetting part, is that keeping us divided and keeping our history the same that they've done with the Black lives and the Black history. It's part of their way of controlling us. And to me, we work with the immigrants, we work with the Black Lives Matter. The last people that we talk about are the first people that were here and that are given the least amount of attention. I think of how many of these young people would still be alive, never mind all the women that have disappeared that nobody talks about. So I will shut up now, but oh, and I did want to ask you, Susan, do you have the proclamation with you?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't see it on the table, but I would like for that to be
Yes.
something that's read so that
Well,
reading without explaining to people, so that, because that's a very important. When I grew up, I was taught just the opposite. So please.
This is a proclamation. It's called the Spencer Phipps Proclamation, and it came out in 1755. And it's a proclamation for a bounty on Penobscot's heads, even children. And for every male Penobscot Indian above the age of 12 years that shall be taken within the time for Frid and aforesaid. Oh, I think that's a.
They used to write S's.
Okay, and brought to Boston 50 pounds for every scalp of a male Penobscot Indian above that age, brought in evidence for them being killed. It was 40 pounds. For a female, it was 25 pounds for the scalp of such female or male Indian under the age of 12 years. And they scalped them. And that's what they would bring to get their money. And people think that scalping is indigenous. It is not. The Europeans came here, and that's where scalping came from. You know? Right. And that's why the Redskins team is so offensive. You know, by using the term Redskins, you don't see black skins. You don't see yellow skins. You know, but it's okay to dehumanize Indigenous people because we are not supposed to be here today. That was the government's mission, to annihilate us. And then when that didn't happen, they put us in prisoner of war camps, which now are known as reservations. Yes?
Can I add to that? So I belong to the First Parish Unitarian Church down the street, and before I knew all this, there was a person giving the storied history of our church. And aghast to all of us was the minister that said, "Bring me these scalps." And that was part of that church's history.
You know.
So.
Well, a lot of churches have. I can pass this around if you would like to see it. Read it yourself. Someone else can come up and get on mic, so I can't go too far.
Almost.
You know, but it's a sad history, and we really do need to know what really happened to Indigenous peoples. When I went to school, we weren't taught to critically think. We were just supposed to purge information, like writing a book report on what it was. You know, we weren't supposed to critically think. Well, thank goodness that has changed. You know, so now we have opportunities to really delve into different portions of history, you know, and read various accounts. Just don't read a book written by a white person. Read a book written by a Native person, you know, or African American, to understand the history. But, you know, I understand why people want to protect it so much, because that's everything that they knew. That's what their life is about. So it takes time to educate people so that they can start to break down those walls and really start understanding the history. And it does take time. It does not happen overnight. It doesn't happen overnight.
Does anybody here know when this movement started toward having an Indigenous Peoples Day, or focusing on Columbus Day as a sort of a flashpoint and looking at bringing in more Indigenous history and possibly removing Columbus Day? Anybody know where it started?
Was it in Denver?
Berkeley? Berkeley. Yes, right. 1992. How many years ago is that, though? Right?
That long ago.
It's a long time ago, and in this entire country, we have 50 to 60 cities that have passed resolutions, and 4 states. And what some of these groups do, some of these locations, is rather than ask to remove Columbus Day, they sort of add, we'll celebrate Native American Day as well. You know, it's something to ask about, but it looks like most of us, I see a young person here, we're of a certain age. You ask yourself, think back. I know as I get older, I can remember what I did when I was 10 a lot better than what I did yesterday. What was your education around American history and around Columbus? Just re-examine it. You know, it might be a nice trip down memory lane, but It's important for every person in this room, you're here for a reason, you can be an ally. Ask yourself, what was my education around Columbus and the history of this country as a child? And you know, you've got relatives, you might have nieces, nephews, children, grandchildren. Go ahead and explore what they're being taught. Those are things that you can do to help grow the movement, you know, to make this change, because while it's a wonderful change, it is the 21st century, and in 20 plus years, we haven't made a whole lot of forward progress on this issue.
I think it's also, what are we going to do with this day? Like, is it just going to be another holiday? I think it's really up to us to create what goes from here. Is it just going to be a holiday? Are they still? Is somebody going to come up with Indigenous Day store sales? I mean, you know, we live in this capitalist society, and so I think it's really important what we do from here on out. That it's not just a symbolic day. And I also wanted to go back to the issue about PC, political correctness. I mean, I have a number of responses to that. One is, yes, it is politically correct, but the other one is, I'm talking about what's historically correct. Yeah. And I think people do use PC and throw it around, but and also this man that was here before and was very upset and saying we were, you know, putting down white people and this was racism against white people. I guess what I see a lot in that is, well, there's two things. In young people especially, I've experienced anger at figuring out they were being lied to. I was at a day of mourning gathering in Plymouth, Massachusetts, which I went to for years and is still continuing. And there was a young boy there, and the person speaking was a Spanish speaker, but he was an indigenous man from South America. I don't remember where. But the boy was really confused. Like, was he Spanish or was he Native? And I said, well, Native people speak Spanish. And he looked like angry and really confused. And I don't think his parent really knew how to deal with it. But I think that's what's going on with a lot of people is, you know, they may respond on the outside with anger, but I think they're really confused. And yeah, a lot of us are pissed about being lied to of all ages. And I will just throw in, I had a high school history teacher who changed my life, the way he taught history. And we didn't go by dates and all that. This was an American history class, and the first was a section. It was just a section on a theme, and the theme was racism and the founding of America. So we learned about treaty stuff. We learned about the Bureau of Indian Affairs. I mean, it was just, and I was ripe for it. I mean, it just flew open my mind, you know, and then we went to slavery issues. And
is this a public school, Margie?
No, it wasn't. And I will say that the teacher did not last long.
Even so.
He was let go after.
Yeah.
But luckily I got him for 1 year, so.
Well, when you talk about PC, people give me crap about this sometimes, but I just think basically being politically correct is just being respectful to another person.
Yeah.
No matter what their culture, their language, it's just being respectful. And that's what it is, really. To me, you'd boil it down and it's respect. Yeah. But we're careless about it. You know, we think, oh, I'm gonna lose my standing. You know, I'm gonna have to share now, you know, everything I have with those people. You know, and it's really not like that. When you get to know us and get to know people of color, my God, it's just so rewarding and it's humanity. Yeah. And it's just, it's loving. You know, even if you don't understand the language, there's always a language of something that you communicate with people. I mean, we have 95% is nonverbal communication. you know? So I just think if people would not be, I guess it's fearful. I guess it runs in fear. And it's just, it's a shame. It's heartbreaking.
Anthea, you have a question?
I want to
Yes.
say three things. I thank you all for the insights and comments and questions that you're raising. I feel really appreciative of that. I want to say one thing is that your question about what do we want to do with this day,
Yeah, good
I think I thanks for raising that. And I love even what this is as a start, and even hearing about your teacher. If one of the things that we could do on this is be a way, an opportunity to learn and to sort of widen participation to continue deepening our learning. So, and there's probably lots of other ideas. Second thing I want to say is that in doing that, part of the intention of this is to destabilize and dismantle the dominant narrative that is a lie. And when that happens, destabilization, we get off kilter. So we're inviting that. We're inviting people to be disrupted, and there's going to be reactions. And so for us to be able to hold this process with a kind of love and compassion for one another and ourselves, I think is really important. And the final thing I want to say is just concretely, the Zinn Education Project, Howard Zinn, has unbelievably good resources online, particularly about Columbus Day, teaching tools for educators. So that is a really wonderful concrete resource, and would love to see maybe a Day for Educators be part of this as well. So, but thank you again.
Thank you, Anthea.
One of the things that you can do to help that process move forward is to speak to your nephews, your grandchildren, your children, speak to their teachers and encourage them to have more programming around Wabanaki culture and history. I do enrichment in Portland, but I can tell you honestly, I did a PD, which is called Professional Development Day, with art teachers, and this was, 2 years ago, and I asked them, how many of you in the last 3 years, this is a room full of teachers across Maine, in the last 3 years have done any curriculum on Wabanaki history and culture? None. None. So ask for it. Ask your child what they're
The
doing.
sad thing was, there was a gentleman, Joseph Charnley, who for quite a few years was the coordinator for Portland. See, everybody is supposed to have, every school system is supposed to have a coordinator for the Wabanaki teaching. And most people don't know it. But Joseph was for Portland. He had an incredible website, and it was full of resources and information and links to the tribes and this and that. But then, he did it voluntarily, and he retired, and no one took it over. So the website's not even there. And at the city council meeting a couple weeks ago, I brought up this again about LD 297 Wabanaki history. And I don't know, I think it might have been a week later or within a couple of days, the superintendent of schools made a comment in the newspaper. And I'm going, and he's saying how he teaches, how the school system teaches about racism and all this stuff and blah, and didn't mention anything about Wabanaki history, but he felt that he covered it all. And I knew just from that article, no, he did not. And no, he does not even know about LD 297. What's the correct name about it? 91? What's the correct name about it now?
Enact to blah, blah, blah.
Wabanaki
Studies. It's just called Wabanaki
It's just
Studies.
Wabanaki Studies?
Correct.
Even here, does everybody know how many tribes there are in Maine?
Most people do.
Okay, there are 4 tribes. 5 reservations, 4 tribes. When we refer to Wabanaki, Wabanaki is a territory, okay? The tribes are Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, and Micmac. And there are 2 Passamaquoddy reservations. And we even asked the kids, because we had all these kids around us, and we asked the kids. No one knew that there were tribes. One child even said, "Oh, we have Indians in Maine." Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's a city councilor.
This was Gorham.
Didn't there used to be like 22 tribes in Maine at one point?
Not just in Maine, but again, because it's a territory.
Yeah.
When we say Wabanaki, it's a territory. It's Maine, but it also goes up into parts of Canada with the First Nations. You know, it's like the Maine Maritime area. You know, because we didn't recognize boundaries like Europeans did. It was just
But you still
everybody's
have
land.
to have a passport to move freely within your ancestral territory.
Well, we didn't have to, but now I think they are making
Because of
the
the
Jay Treaty
real-
covered, Native people for freely going back and forth through the border. But I think now that's in the middle of being changed.
I have C31 status, that's what it's
So
called.
can you still go through
Correct.
back and forth?
Yes, yeah.
Here you go.
Okay.
Here's the,
We're getting
It's late, yeah.
close to time here, and we have one last part to this that is going to
Yes.
happen. So I ask if anybody
LD
has
291.
questions before we move on to this last part. If not only do I want to thank our panel, but I want to take the time right now to thank Brian Leonard.
Yay, Brian!
Single-handedly to make this happen. This was very on the spur of the moment, because this was just passed a couple of weeks ago, and we had a very short turnaround time to put this together in between the Common Ground Fair and Grow. So
Can we thank Jackie?
Yes, thank you, Jackie.
So again, I want to thank all of the panel, and the last thing that we are going to do is Cynthia is going to come up and she is going to share a piece that she wrote and do a closing for us.
So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission finished its work in 2015 and delivered its findings and report at a ceremony in central Maine. And I was asked leading up to that to write a poem to deliver at that event. And for the months leading up to that, I just kept listening to the voices and what people were saying and what this was about. And I also had my hopes and expectations about what the commission's report would find and what they would speak to. And so I wrote this poem entitled Reparation, as it represents for me what are the things that we, as non-native people, the descendants of Europeans, many of us, need to acknowledge, and what are the repairs that we can offer in response to what occurred. So I'd like to read this poem to you now. It's called Reparation. I rose before the dawn this morning. I sat alone and turned on no lamp. Comforted by the dark, I sought to understand myself and all of history. I know what we've done. I acknowledge the taking, your land, your ancestors' lives, your children, your language and prayers. We took the untakeable to feed a hunger that was only in our minds. I acknowledge the lies, doctrines and destinies, Spencer Phipps and old westerns, my history books, executive decrees, unsigned court orders. I don't even know how many treaties we broke. I acknowledge the terror, the overwhelming use of force, mass numbers, burning churches, trails and trails of tears. In a darkened cellar, one small child stands alone, perfect and beautiful, exposed and vulnerable, taken and severed from what she needs to be whole, to belong, to be home, to know her people so that she may know herself. Acknowledge the silence, invisibility, and denial. My privilege, which allows me to hide from harm, to protect my interest while you are exposed to risk. We have never recognized nor measured our debt. So we awaken now to do that accounting. I acknowledge that hope depends on our people finding our shared humanity, standing for what is good in our world and in ourselves. Hope depends on our people repairing the takings with generosity and justice, making amends for the lies with a truthful look at our history and at ourselves, restoring those terrorized with healing and compassion, compensating for our silence by listening and bearing witness, and speaking out, silent no more. Hope depends on knowing that we do not own, that we have no authority from God except a mandate to love one another, to love this place that we call home, to live in peace together. I know what we've done. I have heard your stories, witnessed your tears, been amazed by your resilience that you are still here. While our collective acts are written on my heart, our crimes need not define us. For I know too what is possible when we choose justice and compassion, when we choose to acknowledge and repair, to stand in solidarity. This is the time. This is the hour. Shall we fulfill our mandate and remember who we are? Thank you.
Cynthia, I could not think of a better closing for this evening. This is what I wanted. Brian can edit it. The most important thing is what has been said. That will go on CTN. That will become YouTube. It will get out there. Woohoo! It is what it is about. This little band-aid of Indigenous Peoples Day, which while it is at least something, is just that, just a band-aid. It is up to everybody that's come here to pass on what you've learned. If you're not already involved with REACH, please get involved. If you are able at all to get yourself up to the wonderful fundraiser that's going to happen at the Besom, please do that. Otherwise, go take the brochures, and send whatever you can. This is so important that this space is going to be there for the people, for us all to go and gather. They have 3 more years, including next year, that the healing will be held here in Maine. And then it starts moving around the United States and comes back here for the closing. Because this is where the first sun breaks. So this is where it starts and this is where it ends. So we need that space for many, many reasons. So I just want to thank everybody, and especially Brian, for all of his work, and go safely.
Thank you.